Wall Street veteran Bernard Madoff has been arrested and charged with running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme.
Congress wants to know what caused the Enron meltdown.
Now, while the collective rage currently is focused on WorldCom,
Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski was convicted of looting hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is one of the biggest fraud cases ever.
Their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Find out more on this week's episode of White Collars, Red Hands.
In Harper Lee's famous 1960 novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, Tom Robinson, a black man, is falsely accused of raping a white woman. Throughout the trial process, the book's protagonist, lawyer Atticus Finch, systematically proves this accusation to be false. But the jury convicts Tom anyway, because of societal pretexts of racism. This is not just a story, but loosely based on a true event that happened in Harper Lee's life. All to say that there is a lot of history showing that our justice system does not work in a utopic bubble. Instead, many times people are either convicted or not convicted based on certain unwritten societal rules. Juries don't always make decisions based on facts. Sometimes they make decisions based on feelings. When those on trial are the othered and the disenfranchised, they're more likely to be convicted. Things went slightly different for affluent white men in America's history. Today, we provide a key example, as on February 27, 1956, a man was shot dead in cold blood in the middle of the day in Lafayette Square of Washington, D.C. The murderer confessed immediately, showed no remorse, faced trial, and went on to live a decorated life. That man was none other than New York Congressman Daniel Sickles. What were the circumstances that led up to the murder, and how did he avoid facing consequences? We find out in the season 19 finale of White Collars, Red Hands.
Great. Someone who does not see justice who deserves it. Happy day before 4th of July, everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely, it is very, very topical today with a lot of stuff happening in our courts right now, too. Yeah. In between congressmen and congresswomen. And a lot of really terrible stuff going on. So, hey, we might as well do another one. Also, you'll find out that, well, I guess let's introduce ourselves before I get into it. Right? I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of White Collars, Red Hands. I'm Kashawn.
And I'm Nina. And
yeah, you're going to notice that our story today resembles one that we did a couple of seasons ago. If you remember the story of Harry K. Thaw and the murder of Sanford White, two billionaires, and one was shot in broad daylight. Well, it was at nighttime, but whatever. You get the idea.
In broad nighttime.
In broad nighttime, in front of...
In the moonlight.
In front of like 1,000 people on the roof of Madison Square Garden. And then Harry K. Thaw got off completely scot-free. Well, these stories share a lot of similarities. This one's just a little bit older. Not even that much older, like 40 years older. Daniel Edgar Sickles was...
Terrible name. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry.
He was born at the beginning of the 1800s. Of course he's got a terrible name.
Terrible name.
It's not going to be John, bro. Actually, well, it could be
John. That was like a super popular name back then.
Whatever. Daniel Edgar Sickles was likely born in 1819, although he himself would tell you that it was actually 1825. Turns out bro wanted to appear younger to make it seem less weird when he married a 15-year-old Teresa Baggioli at the age of 32.
Yeah, so great. Okay.
So because, marrying a 15-year-old is so much better when you're 26.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that makes it that makes it so much better, actually.
So don't worry, though. She was very mature for her age, speaking 5 languages.
Oh, she could tell him, I don't consent in 5 languages, and he wouldn't listen to any of them.
Exactly.
Oh, this does sound like today.
Daniel's parents held some of the most evil professions out there of lawyer and politician, and inspired their little evil kid to do both in the future. At first, Daniel started learning to be a printer at what would eventually be New York University, but after graduating, he studied law under the tutelage of famous lawyer Benjamin Butler and was admitted into the bar in 1843. After 4 years of working as a lawyer, he ran and was successfully elected to the New York State House of Representatives in 1847. He married his teenage bride in 1852, and a year later, he became Corporation Counsel of New York City, which is kind of like the de facto lawyer that handle civil battles against a city. In some cases, this is just like the prosecutor, like the city prosecutor. But he was only there briefly, though, as he was offered an even better position as secretary of a diplomatic office under the future of President James Buchanan, and that was in London that he was doing that. Being appointed to the position by current President Franklin Pierce, a president I know nothing about.
I was just going to say, I was like, that was a president?
It was. With his newfound political allies, he moved up from the New York State House to the New York State Senate in 1856, and then he was reelected to the State Senate in 1857 before moving up nationally to the highest office that he held as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 3rd District, which is most of Lower Manhattan.
Okay.
And some other New York City boroughs. And this was despite a pretty notable scandal that he had during his New York tenure that involved a famous courtesan, also known as a prostitute, Fanny White.
Was Fanny White her real name?
I think so.
Oh, well.
But I don't know.
Some people really destine their children for certain careers when they name them.
Well, it technically doesn't. Well, I don't know if it meant. It probably did mean something in America at this time. Yeah. Daniel and Fanny had been having an intimate relationship since 1847, and not in a way that he paid for directly, kind of like a sugar daddy situation. I guess it was common for like notable prostitutes at the time to have like one man that was like their friend that they developed like a romantic relationship with, and didn't like pay for services, but were often like giving them expensive gifts and things. And Sickles was not shy about showing this relationship to the dismay of many around him.
And this is before he married his wife.
We'll talk about it. He would show up to small events and introduce her around the table, making his hoity-toity friends very uncomfortable. He even arranged a mortgage so that Fanny could buy a building to run a high-end brothel out of Greenwich Village, and used his future father-in-law's name to cover his tracks. He signed the mortgage using his future father-in-law's name,
nice.
Mr. Baggioli. When Sickles married Teresa in 1852, Fanny was supposedly so upset that she attacked Sickles with a riding whip. But that might have just been something they did on the reg, so
yeah,
who knows? But Sickles did not let, his wife get in the way of publicly parading his paramour about. Of course not. Even in the worst places to do so. As in August of 1853, Sickles traveled to London to work as a secretary, as I mentioned, and instead of taking his wife with him, he took Fanny, whose name does mean something else entirely in England that is maybe more fitting for a prostitute than what Fanny means here in America.
Yes.
He openly took his mistress around town to theaters and operas. What was really scandalous is how he took her to many diplomatic events, including a reception at Buckingham Palace, where he introduced her to none other than Queen Victoria. Using a fake name, of course. He didn't say, "This is Fanny White."
Yeah, she'd be like, "You're what now?"
He said, like... She's like, "Well, I can see the rest of you, so I know what it looks like."
I know what it looks like.
He introduced her instead as like Mrs. Bennett of New York City, which I think is just something.
But did the people there know he was married?
Yes.
And they knew that woman wasn't his wife?
Correct.
Okay. I do think it's more socially appropriate for him to be bringing around... How old was Fanny White?
I don't know. Not 15.
Yeah. I think it's better for him to bring not a 15-year-old around.
Because at this point, they had been in like a relationship for 5 years. So she was 15. That'd be a much bigger scandal.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, yes, people knew that this was not his wife. And yes, it was scandalous because for this act, he was actually censured by the New York State Assembly. And was also the subject of vicious rumors, including word that money from Fanny's brothels were helped to later fund his political careers and maybe even his other political campaigns.
I believe it.
Used. He helped with the building that a brothel was run out of, so, definitely could be.
I mean, she probably gifted him some money.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And for those of you that don't know what censured it just means that he was like officially rebuked by them. That is what happens when someone is censured. So more importantly for this story and what happens later is that I want you to remember that Daniel Sickles has a public, very known and well-detailed past of unapologetically cheating on his wife and not caring about it at all. So keep that in mind. Meanwhile, in their new town of Washington, D.C., there was a man gallivanting about that in only a few years' time would be shot dead in Lafayette Square by the name of Philip Barton Key. Philip Barton Key was actually Philip Barton Key the second.
That one wasn't enough.
Not the famous circuit court judge and revolutionary Philip Barton Key, okay? Just in case that's who you thought I was talking about. He was actually that Philip Barton Key's great nephew. He was also the son of Francis Scott Key, another lawyer who served as the U.S. attorney for D.C., but you might know him from any sporting event because he wrote the poem called Defense of Fort McHenry, the words of which would be set to music and become the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, wow.
So his dad wrote the words to our national anthem. Which that is actually an old British song that it was set to. It was set to the tune of a British song, which is also kind of a kick to the nuts.
I was just going to say kind of like an FU.
For the Star Spangled Banner, but yeah. Key spent his entire life in Washington, D.C., studying law, most likely with his father. He was known about town to be one of the most handsome men in the city. He did have a very great mustache, I guess, if that counts. But whatever. And it's also not hard because you're in a city that is famously filled with fat old guys.
Yeah,
so
it's not.
maybe not then, but at least now. So he surprisingly had no issue finding a wife, and he married the daughter of a Baltimore attorney in 1845. They had 4 kids together before his wife tragically passed away. But afterwards, and most likely during their marriage, Key became known as a bit of a womanizer, using his devilish good looks to bed many women, even those already spoken for, as it were.
Scandalous.
Plus, bro had a good job, all right? In 1853, he was appointed to the position formerly held by his father when President Franklin Pierce appointed him as the U.S. Attorney for D.C., a position which he would be renominated and reconfirmed to 4 years later under a different president, James Buchanan. All of this is probably how he caught the eye of Teresa Sickles in 1858 after he befriended her husband, the congressman, at a card game. And the two soon began a heated affair. Well, he doesn't.
In paradise.
I mean, I've been very forward that he gets shot, so.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily hiding it either, as much like Dan Sickles did with his mistress, Key was accompanying Teresa about town to various events and private parties. They were seen around enough that rumors swirled about the circles of the Washington elite. But somehow, Daniel Sickles was none the wiser. And this went on for a while right under Sickles' nose. At least it did until February of 1859, when Sickles hosted a dinner at their house. After dinner, most of the guests attended a dance, including both of the Sickles. Upon returning home, Daniel found that an anonymous note had been shoved into his jacket pocket. Opening the envelope, he found a letter that was later publicly printed in newspapers that read, and this is the letter in its entirety. Dear Sir, with deep regret, I enclose to your address these few lines, but an indispensable duty compels me to do so, seeing that you are greatly imposed upon. There is a fellow, I may say, for he is not a gentleman by any means.
Nay.
By the name of Philip Barton Key. And I believe the district attorney, who rents a house of a Negro man by the name of John A. Gray, situated on 15th Street between K and L Streets, for no other purpose than to meet your wife, Mrs. Sickles. He hangs a string out of the window as a signal to her that he is in, and leaves the door unfastened, and she walks in, and, sir, I do assure you, with these few hints, I leave the rest for you to imagine. Most respectfully, your friend, RPG. Can't believe role-playing game sent him that. That's wild. It is still unknown who wrote or gave the letter to Daniel Sickles, but we do know his reaction to it. At first, he didn't believe the letter. He believed it to be a target on him from a political rival to besmirch him. But he was pretty worried about just how specific the details were. I mean, who owned the house, the name of the guy who owned it, where it was exactly.
The string in the window.
It's a lot of specifics for it to be a lie.
Yeah, for sure.
So he sent a friend of his, George Wooldridge, to investigate the house that was described in the letter. George found the house and questioned the neighbors, who indeed said that they had seen a couple fitting the description of Teresa and Philip multiple times at the house. This, and the fact that many rumors already were circulating, made Daniel confront his wife. And at first, Teresa denied the allegations, but after he also laid out all of the details, she confessed that she had been intimate with Key multiple times, not only at the house on 15th Street, but also in their own home when Daniel was away on business.
Oh, no.
Although furious, Daniel eventually became determined that the affair happened because Key took advantage of his young wife.
Well, he called himself out on that one. He was like, no, only I get to take advantage of my young wife.
Only I get to take advantage of my young wife.
Yep.
How dare you do it?
How can you cannot trick me at my own game.
He actually had Teresa write and sign a detailed but very difficult to follow confession to the affair, and had it witnessed by 2 nurses that lived with them that took care of their children, and kept it. It's also probably very vulgar for the time. It talks about how they there was a bed upstairs, there was nothing in the house except for a bed and a sofa. And she would show up just to have sex with him. And I was like, ooh, spicy. But it also, the grammar and flow of it was very difficult. I was like, this woman was under stress when she wrote this for sure. They published it in its entirety in the newspaper.
Why?
You'll find out later.
Oh.
So he then invited Wooldridge, as well as a political supporter, Samuel Butterworth. I think he's unrelated to Mrs.
syrup?
Butterworth. Yeah. So he invited Wooldridge and Butterworth over to talk about how he was to get revenge for the affair. Daniels told them that he wanted to kill Key. And interestingly enough, though, Sickles appeared to be less upset about the affair and more upset about how Key had damaged his political reputation so badly by flaunting it in public. The 2 friends at first tried to talk Sickles down from any sort of violence, but how strongly they did this is debated because some accounts have Butterworth saying, I'm just imagining he's a very jowly person.
Yeah.
So, if that be so, there is but one course left for you as a man of honor. You need no advice. Which really kind of just sounds like, yo, shoot that guy, bro.
That would be so crazy if you killed him. Don't do it. Don't. That would be crazy. Don't do it.
And it just so happened that while they were discussing, a completely oblivious Philip Barton Key had arrived outside the house and was trying to get Teresa's attention by waving a white handkerchief while walking the street outside her house.
Read the room, bro.
Turns out he had been renting a hotel room across the way of Lafayette Square, and he was looking at the window with a pair of opera glasses.
Not creepy at all.
Well, it's because she would send him a signal from the window. But she hadn't signaled him, probably because of everything going on.
Because she was having to write a ransom letter, damn near.
So he instead, when she didn't send the signal, he came down and was using the handkerchief because he's like, what's going on?
He's like, hey, I'm horny.
So Daniel was in a rage. Butterworth actually left the house and exchanged greetings with Key before leaving.
Did he know Key?
Yes. They all know each other. They all work in politics.
Oh my God.
They're in Washington, D.C. All of these people know each other.
Oh my God.
So he says like, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And Philip is like, "Oh, hey, Butterworth, how you doing?" Blah blah blah, whatever. And he just leaves, not keying
Doesn't confront
him
him
at all.
Doesn't confront him. Just is like, "Oh, hey, man."
Yeah, doesn't even tell him
What's
like,
up?
"Yo, there's a madman behind me that wants to fucking kill you."
Yeah.
None of that. So he goes on his way, and then Daniel Sickles is coming out right behind him, armed with 3 pistols.
Whoa.
He exited the house after Butterworth. So Philip thought they were still friends. So he actually is like, "Hey, how are you?" Uh-huh. You know, like greets him warmly.
Yeah.
To which Sickles responded, "You villain! You have dishonored my house and you must die."
Okay.
So, you know, not a
It's
great
very
start.
dramatic. You've dishonored my house. Like he hasn't been sleeping with a sex worker.
"You villain, you have dishonored my house and you must die." And he pulled a pistol out of his pocket, and obviously that took Key off guard.
Mm-hmm.
So he threw his opera glasses at him.
Take
like,
that.
"Ah, you scoundrel,
Don't do that.
be gone." And he basically begged Sickles not to shoot him. He was like, "Please don't shoot me. Murderer, murder," I guess is what he cried. But obviously, shoot Daniel Sickles did. The first shot went wide. He missed him. But the second shot found purchase in the groin of Key. Sickles then fired 3 more times at close range, physically struggling with Key, who had tried to run away. 1 missed, but 2 landed squarely in the man's chest. And as Sickles stood over the fatally wounded Key, onlookers said he once again repeated his line, "You villain, you have dishonored my house and you must die." And Key soon acquiesced. Immediately, Daniel Sickles worried that a political rival would try to avenge Key, so fearing for his life and understanding that he just murdered a man in broad daylight with plenty of witnesses, he instead walked immediately to the Attorney General's house and turned himself in. So Sickles was obviously well connected as far as lawyers go, so he put together a mid-19th century dream team of 7 lawyers to represent him. That included famous criminal lawyer James T. Brady, who had won 51 of 52 murder cases in his career.
All right.
Imagine being that one. Ugh.
I know, that would suck.
Ugh. And also included Edwin M. Stanton, who would later be the Secretary of War for President Lincoln during the American Civil War.
Okay.
But even with the best lawyers money could buy, the case originally looked difficult to win. I mean, Sickles admitted to the crime and showed no remorse. The only option for a plea was not guilty by means of insanity if he was going to go not guilty. But at the time in America, a defendant was only deemed to be insane if they did not understand that they had done something wrong.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, this right or wrong doctrine. And that kind of equated to if they knew that they were committing a crime or not. Basically, if they could say that they're like, "I knew this was a crime," then they're technically not insane. Or they were suffering from a mental illness that overcame their reasoning and still forced them to commit a crime, even if they knew that it was a crime. Sickles understood that murder was a crime and was not obviously suffering from a mental illness. So this, couldn't be an option, right?
Yeah.
Well, up until now, yeah, that couldn't be an option. But Sickles' team, for the first time in American history, argued that Sickles was a victim of a brief break in judgment based on the anger that was caused from learning that Key defiled his marriage bed, creating the plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity.
I'm only crazy for a little bit.
Just a tiny bit crazy.
It was a full moon.
It was daytime.
It was going to be a full moon later.
In reality, though, it was a crime of passion. Like, was Sickles upset? Sure. Yes, he was. And when people are this upset, they can do rash things, like even kill somebody. Mm-hmm. But in a more modern way of thinking, this would still be at least manslaughter. I mean, you couldn't argue that being super upset meant that you were temporarily insane.
Yeah, I've been pretty upset in my life, and you know what I've never done? Commit a murder.
like crimes of passion usually aren't like murder in the first. They're usually murder in the second or manslaughter, right? But like still murder. Like,
yeah, you still killed somebody.
You still couldn't get a not guilty plea just because like, I was really upset. But in the 1800s, this argument could be used to basically justify arguments that aligned more with public opinion. Just like Harry K. Thaw and his Dementia Americana that we covered previously, which was literally just a term for this exact same thing. Like a guy being so upset that someone had defiled his marriage bed by sleeping with his wife that he became enraged and temporarily insane enough to just murder somebody. And public opinion, at least the public opinion of those that sat on juries at the time, white men with money, were in favor of Sickles. In fact, during jury selection, they found it impossible to find enough people that said they weren't sympathetic with what Sickles had done. 72 of 75 potential jurors admitted to that they were sympathetic to what he did in response to Key sleeping with his wife. So they created a completely... They couldn't create a completely impartial body of jurors.
I think it's pretty hard to do that anyway.
Well, basically, the entire pool of people they were going to select from were going to
be
like,
biased in some way.
Yeah, I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they moved forward with the trial starting April 4th, 1859. This is another one of those like trial of the centuries. There's one of them every year, you know, but this was another one. It was very highly publicized. And the defense called multiple character witnesses that testified about the affair and colored Key as a devilish villain who preyed upon naive young women. They actually pulled the exact same thing in the Sanford White. Harry K. thought that there really is a lot of crossover, like I said at the beginning. And although the judge said the confession written by Teresa was inadmissible in court because it technically counted as private correspondence between spouses, which is protected, it's the same reason that you can't force a spouse to testify against the other in court.
Oh, I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can't, even if the spouse like has said they like know their spouse did something, you can't force them to, you can't like subpoena them and force them to testify.
Interesting.
The confession was leaked and published publicly in newspapers, so that's why they published it, is because it was getting such notoriety. So people, you know, also in the 1800s they didn't really care if they printed stuff like this.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't really care now, but whatever. No. But you couldn't, you know, you probably can't sue them in the 1800s, or it'd be hard. And it made its way into the trial through witness testimony. The details from that at least made its way through other witnesses' testimony. The jury also heard testimony from Wooldridge and Butterworth about how Sickles was inconsolable that day and crazy, and when they met him on the day of the murder, and especially when Key was noticed outside, he was like making all these like crazy sobbing sounds, or, you know, whatever. Like, he was just generally upset. And to top it all off, the defense often quoted Bible passages about adultery and its punishments, and basically said to the jurors that, like, you're not good Christians if you don't agree what Sickles had done in response.
I think that is a perfect example of twisting scripture to fit your own narrative, but okay.
That being said, the prosecution just kind of had no real good defense against any of these tactics. And after only 70 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned the verdict of not guilty by means of insanity. One of the only times that the insanity plea had worked up to this point in America.
Wow. And
the first time ever that it was temporary insanity. Don't think you hear that much anymore.
No, I don't think so.
Because it seems like this like plea of not guilty by temporary insanity is only used in cases like this, whereas like it's something so unbelievable in the societal eye happened that someone broke and did something crazy. So now you're probably thinking, well, you know what? At least Daniel Sickles, now known murderer, even though he was acquitted, was probably ostracized by the political community. Well, you're wrong.
Yep.
The only thing that they got mad at him for, actually, was reconciling and staying with his wife.
What the fuck?
Also,
but divorce was I thought divorce was pretty uncommon back then.
but with adultery, I think they were cool.
They were
I think they were cool with adultery. You could get rid of her.
But they're mad at him for staying with his wife.
Yeah.
But he's been cheating on her their whole marriage.
Yeah. Well, guys can cheat. At the time.
Yeah.
Also,
now they still can.
Also, once again, crazy of her to take him back. He literally killed her lover, but it's also the 1850s, so I kind of understand. So he did not resign from Congress either. He stayed in Congress, and he actually only left as the Civil War broke out. And then he started putting in a lot of effort to rehab his public image by raising troops for the Union. Although he was an elected Democrat, which was actually the opposite party of Lincoln at the time. Lincoln was a Republican. This was before the party switched, when they switched platforms. So anyone who is like, well, Lincoln was a Republican is dumb, and they don't understand history if they're trying to use that as a reason why Democrats now are evil. Whatever. So he had previously joined the New York militia and attained the rank of major there. So when the war started, he was appointed colonel of a regiment in the New York infantry, eventually rising to brigadier general in 1861, leading troops through multiple battles in the Civil War before Lincoln promoted him to major general in 1862, making him the only corps commander who didn't go to West Point.
Oh, interesting.
So he was kind of, that was a little scandalous. During the Battle of Gettysburg, Sickles lost a leg after being shot with a cannon, but it was amputated later that day, and he survived.
Wow.
Yeah, probably not many people survived limb amputation.
No.
At the time. He then weirdly went on to donate the mangled bones to the National Museum of Health and Medicine, which would display them for several years afterwards, alongside a replica cannonball. So you could go see, like, this is what a cannonball does to a leg when it hits it.
Oh, my God.
Even weirder is that Sickles would make a pilgrimage to see his bones on the anniversary of the day he lost them every year.
That feels like a trauma response.
He's like, I got to go see my leg bones.
Yeah.
He was also... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it just feels like a trauma thing.
He was also super pissed that they didn't save the bones to his foot. He was
They probably were shattered.
Well, the bones to his legs definitely were. They had those. He's like, why the fuck didn't you save the foot? I guess they only saved the leg at his request. He was like, I want that. And then he was pissed off they didn't have the foot, too. Sickles wanted to return to combat. Even, like, he wanted to still be on the field.
With one leg?
Yes, even though he had lost a leg. But Ulysses S. Grant told him no.
Yeah.
He's like, that's a stupid idea. But he still let him operate as a brigadier general and a major general for the army, working on, I don't know, tactics or some shit. Unfortunately, in 1867, Teresa passed away from tuberculosis. And
wait a minute, she didn't outlive him?
Oh no, she died young. Ugh. She died in her 30s.
What a tragic life.
Yeah, it was pretty rough.
I hope he really rocked her bones. I really hope he gave her the loving she deserved.
Seemed he was pretty good at it, and I mean, he had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
So she passed away from tuberculosis, and 2 years later, in 1869, Sickles finally retired from the military and was immediately appointed to the position of the U.S. Minister to Spain, a position which he served in for 5 years. He did remarry. He remarried like a French person out there, and they had a couple more kids. And he served in multiple other high-ranking positions, being appointed to the chairman of the New York State Civil Service Commission. And then he also acted as the sheriff of New York County for 1 year in 1890. He was the sheriff. And then in 1892, he was elected again to Congress and served another 2-year term, even though he legit murdered someone like 30 years before that.
They didn't care.
Well, he finally died on May 3rd, 1914, from a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 94.
That is crazy that he lived that long back then and had his leg blown off.
Yep.
That is impressive, even though he did a lot of bad things.
I feel like he was just fueled on spite.
Yeah.
You know how just like really angry people seem to
they
live for
live
longer?
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
That's him. In the end, the story of Philip Key's murder is one of a case settled not by the actual law as it is written, but instead by the unwritten law of public opinion. It is hard to separate collective ideas of morality from jurors who are supposed to follow the law. Sometimes people don't get juries of their peers. like the fictional Tom Robinson, who represents countless people of color who have been convicted more based on biases than facts. Sometimes people have juries that are too much like their peers, and that was the case with Daniel Sickles. Although he had a documented history of cheating publicly on his wife in the exact same fashion that she was cheating on him, he was somehow socially justified in murdering the man who did the same to him. In the end, it minimizes the autonomy that women have over themselves. Like, maybe she wanted to sleep around because her husband was a piece of shit. But unfortunately, that piece of shit lived a long and fruitful life after gunning someone down in public. But that likely wouldn't have been the case if he wasn't a rich white man in the 1850s. So that's the story of, I don't know how many Congress people have murdered someone and not faced any sort of repercussions for it. But we know it's at least not zero.
It's not zero, and it's a higher number than we care to admit.
Yeah. So that is the story of Daniel Sickles and the murder of Philip Barton Key II, may I add. And that was the season 19 finale.
Yes, it was.
Of White Collars, Red Hands. So for those of you who are new, I mean, obviously we just did a murder. That's like normal. But we're going to be taking a break after this, 3-4 week break. And then we'll be back with season 20.
Damn.
So if you haven't already gone back and listened to our past episodes, you want to fill some time in during then, listen to some of those, feel free to do so. We're still getting messages. I just recently got a message that said, like, hey, I just found your podcast. I'm listening to like 4 years of episodes back to back. So, and had a suggestion in it too. So thank you so much for sending that over.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. If you are like that person and you're liking what you hear, you want to support us, you can do so by leaving a rating. You can give us a star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts, you can include words if you want to write a paragraph or so. Feel free to do that. If you're not on one of those, don't worry. You can like, subscribe, follow, whatever on any of the podcatching services you use. But I would recommend, if you're going to listen somewhere, to listen on Spotify, because you can watch our videos just like you can on our YouTube channel at White Collars, Red Hands. You can also... there are ads in our podcasts, okay? We've been doing it for 4 years. It costs money to make this. We don't make a profit on this podcast.
No, we don't.
At least not yet.
No.
So ads are included. If you want to listen without ads for only $1 a month on Spotify, you can also subscribe to the podcast, and then you get full ad-free listening just for $1. And that's probably more than what we'd get from the ads you make, so we'd be very...
honestly,
very thankful to you if you did that. You can also interact with us if you want to support us on any of our social media, maybe facebook.com/White Collars Red Hands, X at White Collars Pod, Instagram at White Collars _Red Hands, TikTok, that's at White Collars Red Hands. You can catch us anywhere there. You can send us a message and you can suggest an episode. We have multiple episodes suggested for our fan submitted episode next season, but we will do multiple if they're interesting, and we'll always give you a little bit of a shout out.
Yeah.
So feel free to send us ideas that we haven't touched on yet over. You can send those through a DM on the social platforms, or you can send us an email at whitecollarsredhands@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, whitecollarsredhands.com, go to the contact us section at the bottom of the page, and that'll send us a message too. Also, while you're there, you might as well click that button that says check out our merch and go to our Dashery store and buy. There's even more stuff now, actually. I don't even know the multitudes that they're offering over at Dashery now that switched over from TeePublic. But you can get a hat, a shirt, sweatshirt, tote bag, stickers, all that good stuff over there if you want. And we get a cut of that as well. So once again, would love that. Oh, and then last thing, the best way to spread news of a podcast?
Word of mouth.
Is word of mouth. Tell everyone you know. Don't stop talking about it. Talk about it so much that people start getting annoyed with you. That's what I hope from you, is that your friends start going like, oh my God, I'll listen to it just to get you to shut up. You know, that would be helpful for us.
Yeah, coerce your friends into listening to us.
Coerce your friends by whatever means necessary is our motto. You know, so do that. I think that's it. So with the same sign off we always do. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in season 20 of White Collars, Red Hands.